historically, India has created all sorts of incredible human talent, right? They have incredible institutes of technology, institutes of management, and they produce world-class talent, and that includes 25 S&P 500 CEOs, including Google and Microsoft. So, these are things you're not going to find this in other emerging markets in India or in Vietnam or Indonesia. So, India's human capital is one of the things that makes it so special. And it is true that historically, the smartest kids, the best kids, if they could, they would come to the United States and work in Silicon Valley or in some other profession. And the ones that stayed home, the job they wanted was to work for the government because it was the most stable job, and entrepreneurship wasn't really accepted. But that's changed in a meaningful way.
This is Insight is Capital. Join us in our fireside chats with some of the most fascinating people in finance to discuss their insights on life, markets, macro, investment strategy, and much more.
In the last 7 years, the number of startups in India has absolutely exploded. There were less than 500 startups in India 7 years ago. Today, there's 120,000. And India has their own Shark Tank television program now. It's in the fourth season. And so you finally have unleashed this human capital. They're one of the companies that I've profiled for a few years. It was these two kids from India that went to Stanford, and they got into Stanford, which isn't easy to do.
Right.
And when they were teenagers still, when they were freshmen, they dropped out of Stanford to go back to India. So this is a big part of the India story. It is true that a lot of their, they had brain drain for a while, but even before there were talks about, changing the visa rules, Indians were increasingly looking to go back to India when they graduated from our colleges than they did before.
In the American view, it's better if, they establish the business in the U.S. and build the wealth in the U.S. rather than exporting it elsewhere. And you can see where a lot of the current policy on immigration that's coming out of the new administration would drive more of that away, where American educated Indians go back to India with their education. I thought, one of the most promising things that I heard, last year in terms of policy blurbs coming out of the president's mouth was that we're going to make it so that foreign students educated in the U.S. basically get the equivalent of a golden ticket so that they're incentivized to stay and establish their businesses here. But he hasn't made good on that, which is that if you're a foreign, if you're a foreign student educated at an Ivy League school in the U.S., why wouldn't you grant that person the opportunity to stay and give them permanent residency so that they do have an incentive to start a business in the U.S. rather than just taking the education and trotting off back to their home country and doing it there?
No,
it's kind of the other side of what we're talking about, right? Which is
I know exactly what you're talking about, and I couldn't agree more. And I always, as discussed, my partner Bert Malkiel has, been teaching economics at Princeton for decades, and he used to say that all the time. He said our best export is Ivy League educations. These kids come over, they get the best education in the world, and they take it and go back somewhere else. And so why not have those high-performing, high-productive, students have an opportunity to stay and contribute to the United States? And this goes back to, Milton Friedman. Immigration's good. You need population growth. It helps with economic growth, and you want, that doesn't mean you have, escaped, drug lords are probably not the people you want, but if you can get some, smart, successful people, it doesn't matter what country they come from, but if they go to Harvard or Stanford and they've got one of our educations, it seems like we'd make it as easy as possible. The good news for India is that Indian talent was already starting to go back because they see the opportunity, because the Indian internet story is absolutely exploding. And, I don't think people realize how good India is. I mean, you've got everything you want in an emerging market. I mean, as I tell people, it's perfect on paper. You've got the biggest population in the world. Every day it sets a record as the largest population ever, right? China's
Right.
demographics finally caught up with it. So India is the biggest ever. If you leave out China, it's bigger than every other emerging market combined. So, this can't really happen again in any of our lifetimes at this scale. You've got the best demographics, the average age under 30, and all of the demographic figures look amazing.
Yeah.
You've
So
got the
Kevin,
fastest growing economy,
let
and that's driving massive consumption, just like we saw in China over the last 20 years. But when you take all of these things together and you forecast out 20 years, India should pass China and have significantly more consumption. So on paper, India has got everything you want. And now, uh, the reason I think that India's finally, gotten its stuff together is largely because of Modi's leadership. I mean, the country dragged and continues to drag a lot of bureaucratic legacy, a lot of socialist legacy, and Modi came in with a machete and tried to start, making it simple to do business and making it easy to start a company, making it easy to close a company. But he also doubled the country's infrastructure, and literally in 10 years, everything they had, it'd be the first 65 years, he basically doubled it. And he's still got another $1 trillion on the master plan for infrastructure. So they're never going to catch up with China at this point, but at least they're getting the basics together. And it's, I've spent November there, and it's
Yeah.
hard on the eyes. There's so much going on.
One thing, Kevin, and then I want to ask you about the mega trends that are driving your outlook. I recall, one project that I recall, speaking of infrastructure, was the Bandra Worli overpass, the Seaway Bridge, which linked the two quadrants of Mumbai, which were otherwise snarled in traffic, that went around that big bay,
Yeah.
right? But they built that gigantic suspension bridge from Bandra to Worli,
Yes.
and the Sea Link, and that cut travel times from one side of the bay in Mumbai to the other. And those were some examples of how they were building new infrastructure at the time. I'm going back to 2000, 2008, 2009, but that was that was like a showcase infrastructure project, and was going to revolutionize traffic in Mumbai, or like completely unsnarl things. But
Well,
so yeah, so I wanted to ask you. There's so much to talk about. I wanted to ask you how have things evolved? What are the mega trends that are driving this view on India, and then how does that also go out into emerging markets at large?
well,
Is it similar elsewhere? Yeah.
what I've been focused on, for the last 10, 11, 12 years is basically there's three mega trends happening at the same time. You got 6.5 billion people in emerging markets becoming consumers. They're getting their first ever computer, and it's not a desktop, it's an Android-based smartphone, and
Right.
they're getting the internet. And you add those things together, and it's driving massive growth. And um and where we saw this the most in the last 10 years was China. And Alibaba, Tencent, and many other Chinese internet giants emerged, and they basically digitized all of consumption, not just social networking or shopping. It's healthcare, it's financial services. So China is highly digitized at this point. It's the most digital economy on the planet, um, but those trends are continuing to sweep the world. And in Latin America, they're a little further ahead with companies like Mercado Libre. In Africa, they're way behind, but where the sweet spot is right now is in India. And India is as good as you're ever going to get. And it's got a lot of the things we talked about, but it's also got the one part of the India story that I think maybe the most compelling is the part that nobody knows anything about, which is India's proprietary digital public infrastructure, the India stack.
Yeah, and so talk about that.
Okay, well, the India stack is what people call India's proprietary homemade digital public infrastructure. Now, let's start with what in the heck is digital public infrastructure, because that sounds really boring. Digital public infrastructure is hugely important to the world. We're using it every day. The best example is the internet. It's digital.
Right.
Anyone can use it, and you can't see it like you can see the oil pipelines or the bridges and roads, but it's the roads and bridges for the information age. So we have digital public infrastructure. We use it all the time.
Right.
Another great example is GPS. I didn't launch a satellite. You didn't launch a satellite. I don't even know who did, but if I want to get a car to the airport, I can push a button on my phone. A car will show up. I don't even have to talk, and it knows where to take me.
Right.
Uber didn't launch a satellite either, but so it's not just people that can leverage these pieces of digital public infrastructure. It's also businesses, and hundreds of billions of dollars of businesses have been built on top of these pieces of digital public infrastructure. Now, India has the internet, of course, and it has GPS, but it's also got its own, and it's absolutely genius. And I am convinced it is one of the most important parts of the story. And it's my strong opinion that the world doesn't know about this and doesn't appreciate it in terms of the United States and developed world investors. So let me tell you what the India stack is comprised of. The first layer, the first piece of digital public infrastructure in the stack is called Aadhaar,
Okay.
which is the Hindi word for foundation. So the reason it's called the stack is if you made a picture of these different programs, it looks like a stack of pancakes because that's what the slide looks like to
Right.
explain it. But the bottom pancake, if you will, the foundation is called foundation. And it's an identification layer. Okay, it's a digital identification layer. And here's how this whole stack started, because there's a very clear hero in this story. In 2009, the Indian government finally decided that they needed to start a national identification card program. They needed to give every single person in the country a physical card with their
Right.
name and their picture and their information, because one of India's big challenges in developing was that nobody had an identification. Only about 17% of the population had any form
Really?
of identification, and only 40% even had a birth certificate. So a lot of people don't even know their birthday.
Right.
And with this as the backdrop, it was very hard to develop the economy. And so they finally decided to tackle this, and they asked a man named Nandan Nilekani if he would be in charge of this program. And Nandan Nilekani is well known in India. He's
Yeah.
one of the co-founders of Infosys, and he's the
Right.
chairman of the board of Infosys today, and a multi-billionaire. And they asked him if he would lead this program, which would be a public-private, nonprofit partnership. And he agreed to lead this Aadhaar program, but he insisted that not only would they give everyone a physical card with their picture and their name and information, but when the people registered for the Aadhaar program, they would also scan their thumbs and their eyes,
Oh, okay.
so that everybody that was in the system could be instantly verified as who they were. Now, I remember when they launched the program, but I didn't really pay attention to it until 4 years ago, and I was somewhat shocked with what I found, which is that since they launched this, 95% of the population is registered.
Wow.
So,
Hmm.
1.4 billion people are now
Yeah.
registered. They now have a physical ID. And I didn't, I don't know if I learned about this and I forgot, but in 2014, they started a program with the banking sector, and they said, if you're in the database, if you're an Indian citizen, you've registered, you can walk into a bank and instantly open a bank account with no paper.
If you have.
Remember, India
Yeah.
had almost no financial inclusion. Almost
Right.
nobody had a bank account or a credit card or a debit card. And since they launched that program in 2014, so in the last 10 years, 800 million people walked into a bank and opened their first ever bank account, a digital bank account. And they did it 2 minutes. You walk in, look in the camera, put down your thumb, push the button, you now have a bank account. So I mean, this would have taken 60 years in the old world, but
That's astonishing.
I mean, I found it very astonishing, and I had no idea about it, and it was like it was a kind of a aha moment for me. But that's just the beginning of
Right.
this. So just like Uber can leverage GPS, private companies can use this as well. And so 2016 really was the big bang year for India's digitization. And so what happened, they passed 1 billion people in the database in April of that year.
Right.
And in September, they Reliance Jio. Reliance is a big conglomerate, and
Right.
they launched their own mobile carrier. They bought the first 4G airwaves in India. And between the airwaves and building a brand new state-of-the-art physical network to cover the country, they spent $25 billion. 4G, but ready for 5G and 6G. Now, at the time, you had a very fragmented mobile carrier market. You had about a dozen players, and they were all on 2G, and there was a massive price war. So nobody even had money to invest in 3G. Smartphones were finally getting, affordable and getting sold fast online.
Right.
And Geo launches that September 2016. Now, if you had gone into a Vodafone store or an Airtel store, it would have taken you 3 hours at least to get a new phone, maybe 3 days. Well, Geo set themselves up so when you registered in their stores, you just looked in the camera and put your thumb down.
So you don't even have to. You don't have to know how to write or read or.
They signed up
Yeah.
1 million people a day for 3 months, and there's now 500 million people on Geo. Now, Geo also has the lowest cost data in the world. The Indian smartphone bill is 15 cents for a gigabyte. We pay 50 times as much.
See, now I know what they're doing with all that dark fiber.
Yes.
That dark, what was once dark fiber is now being used. Yeah.
And the India smartphone uses more data than any other smartphone in the world. They watch a lot of video. They consume lots of video. So you've used this genius, just this first layer of the stack, to bring the population digitally into the financial system for the first time. 500 million people on Geo alone now with the lowest cost data, 5G available across the whole country. So that's the ID layer. Now, the second layer of the stack is a payments layer called the Unified Payments Interface, which was also launched in 2016. Now, when they launched that, it got a lot of coverage, but I didn't totally understand the why it was so important. The headline was QR code-based payments. Now, if you were a China person, everything in China had been covered in QR codes, and everything was paid for with smartphones. But this was just getting to India, and I thought, okay, well, this isn't really cutting edge, but congratulations.
Yeah.
But it really was cutting edge. I didn't realize it. This isn't Apple Pay. This is instant transfer of money from one account to another account, almost like a text.
Yeah.
I send you 1,000 rupees. I push the button. It is instantly out of my account, and it's instantly in your account. And there's no friction, and there's no cost. There's no Visa.
Wow.
There's no one else is touching it. So we could send 1,000 rupees to each other 20 million times, and it would still be 1,000 rupees going back.
Yeah, it's not Venmo, it's not PayPal, it's not Interact like we have in Canada. It's
instantaneous.
Is it now?
Free.
Are all these digitalizations on blockchain? Or getting there, or
they're working on that. I don't think they are, but they're certainly aware of this, and I think that Nandan has another broader global plan that certainly involves blockchain. But I can't speak to that specifically for these layers, but so this unified payments interface launches in 2016, at the very end of the year, and what is transpired, I don't have any charts with me, but the number of monthly payments now in India, on the UPI, it's about 16 billion a month, which is half of the entire planet instant payments. And I mean, it's still growing at 55%. I mean, this is the classic early part of a hockey stick of digitization. But right behind that, the entire Indian economy in that same period, when it started in 2016, the Indian economy was 95.5% paper currency.
Yeah.
Not checks,
Yeah.
not wires, paper currency, 95.6%. Now it's 80% digital and 20% paper.
That's wild.
So in 7 years, they digitized the entire economy. And now you can't use paper currency on the streets. Everything is paid for on your phone. They also simplified the tax code, another one of Modi's, machete wins. And the tax collections are now rising faster than the economy is growing. And so, and I've only touched the beginning of this. Now everybody has a digital financial track record. And so you can create your own credit score. So there's a new layer that will help credit, an account aggregator layer. So you can say, I'm an Indian consumer. I will share my banking information, my brokerage information, whatever financial information I have. I can do it in an encrypted way and get access to credit for the first time. So this digitization is hugely, hugely important. And there's no country that has this. There's no developed country that has this. There's no emerging country that has this. And I believe it is worth at least $1 trillion. If you look at the efficiencies added by this, the cost savings, the amount of corruption that's been cut out of the system.
Right.
I mean, this is an absolute game changer. And so if you think about this India versus where China was, 20 years ago, nobody in the world had a smartphone when China was at this stage. Today, this smartphone device is now available for $12. You can get a brand new smartphone in India for $12. So the advance in that 20 years of the personal supercomputer is remarkable. And then you put that population on top of this digital operating system. And there's really no antecedent for this. This is a thing that is unprecedented. And I don't think people appreciate how good India looks. And I know that they don't understand this digital secret weapon, the India stack, which I can't emphasize enough, I think is incredibly powerful.
It's actually the first I've heard of it myself.
Well, again, as I said, 4 years ago, I had heard about it.
Yeah.
But, digital public infrastructure just start to fall asleep by the time you're done saying that.
You
right?
just didn't know, you didn't know, you didn't know what the ramifications were yet.
I didn't.
Yeah.
I was worried the ramifications of trying to study it, I was going to fall asleep because it sounded more like fiber cables but when I finally saw what they had done with this, I was like, whoa, hold on. You opened 800 million bank accounts? Let me understand this. That's hard to believe. But now I get it. And this is why, one of the Bert Malkiel's things he's known for is efficient markets, right? That anything that's known about a business should be reflected in the stock prices because there's 50 smart analysts that all went to good schools and they're all watching all the same information. And so between all of them, all these things should show up in the market prices. Well, I know that's, I think, statistically true-ish, but I'm absolutely convinced that the investment world does not know about the India stack. And because I talk to the investment world and I've never, asked an audience and had someone say, I know what it is. And I've only had one person try to answer the question, what is digital public infrastructure? So anyway, I think this really is a hugely important part of the story, and I just don't think the investment world is, it can't be reflected in the valuations because nobody knows about it.
It's reminiscent of what Apple has done with its ecosystem. Like if you've got an iPhone, you've got a Mac, and you've got, if you've got all these Apple accessories, they all connect seamlessly when you want them to. The Apple ecosystem has it sounds like something that would rival what Apple has done. For you to say that it has, perhaps $1 trillion valuation, that's not so far-fetched.
No.
But it's under,
I actually believe that's a conservative estimate.
yeah, it's completely under-recognized.
I haven't completed this. Obviously, there's no way to.
It's got to be worth at least $1,000 per capita,
Well,
right?
well,
Consider like a billion,
uh,
1 point.
well, that would put it at $1 trillion, and I'm confident that it's. I mean, again, there's no way to actually calculate this. We will do the calculation. I've actually done a calculation using DeepSeek, which came to 1.2 trillion.
Yeah.
But you just let me give you another example.
DeepSeek's
Another
pretty
piece
good.
of
I mean, DeepSeek's pretty good at modeling.
Here's another one of the examples. I don't even think DeepSeek captured this. One of the other deployments of technology. This is just a kind of a simple one. When you go from one state to another in India, you have to stop at the border and pay a toll if you're in a car, and if you're in a truck, with cargo, you need to pull off the road and go into like a yard, a lot.
Right.
And you have to wait for the tax collector to come. This is how it used to be. You'd have to wait for the tax guy to come out with a pad of paper and go through your inventory and make a physical paper tax bill for you. And that could take 24 hours before you could go.
Right. This was
journey. And
that layer of bureaucurity
and there was always a little extra tax, if you will, to keep things moving. And I think they estimate $130 per trip in bribes. And now every single vehicle has a fast tag, and there's digital toll paying, and every truck has a digital inventory manifest. And so the savings of time, the emissions from cars idling, I mean, the value of that's in the tens and tens of billions of dollars. So I'm quite confident that the stack is worth at least $1 trillion in terms of its net present value.
How are valuations right now in India?
They're significantly better than they were in the fourth quarter of last year. India's had a decent correction. Now, there's a few asterisks to go with this in terms of India and the valuation. I would also say that, I spent November in India, and, I came back, and my report had 5 takeaways, and the 5th takeaway was that there was a lot of exuberance in the India stock market
Right.
last year, and there was a very hot IPO market. You had something that I learned early in the year that was startling, that there was 80% of all of the options trading in the world were coming from Indian retail investors, which I couldn't believe was true.
Wow.
Was true, not dollar amount, but number of trades. So there was this huge number of new online traders that were gambling on options. I had, people that I know that they're not investment professionals, that, more than one of them told me that they had started to trade the stock market to make extra money. So there was a lot of anecdotal things out there about exuberance. But when I looked at the PE multiple for the India stock market, now, let's make sure we're clear on this. The MSCI India Index is the index that most people talk about. So when they say, how did India do? If you're looking at the Wall Street Journal, that's going to be, how did the MSCI India do? That's the 130 largest companies.
Okay.
Okay. Now, the valuations for it had a PE of about 25 at its top. It's about where the S&P was. But it had earnings growth of about 20%. So the PE doesn't mean not much to me without the growth rate, because the faster the growth, the higher the PE should be. So the PEG ratio was, 1.8 1.3, maybe it got to 1.4, but didn't look like a bubble. But then when you looked at the next 300 stocks, the small mid-cap part of MSCI, well, they had PEs in the 40s. But then there's another 5,000 stocks below that.
Right.
And they might only be 10% of the total value, but there was all sorts of speculation going on. Small cap IPOs going up 600, 800%. And so I wasn't surprised that the Indian stock market has had a decline, but, again, at that top index level, it never was really a bubble. And now the PEG ratio is back to maybe 1.2. The earnings growth is going to be softer this year.
Yeah.
But for the internet companies that we invest in, the new age tech stocks of India, the food delivery companies, the online travel, buy your airplane tickets, book your hotel room, those kind of businesses, which is what we invest in. The PE's, 40, but the earnings growth is 40. So, I mean, the PEG ratio was about 1. And frankly, I mean, the one of the things about the Indian internet opportunity is it's so green fields. Like every direction you look, there's a decade plus of significant growth opportunity. And so, this is when you especially don't want to be focused on earnings. You don't want your companies focused on near-term earnings. You want them focused on long-term earnings and the long-term opportunity, because, just as Amazon, when it launched, basically didn't make a profit for 20 years because they were like, well, why would we be focused on reporting this when we can get to here?
Right.
And I think that obviously you need earnings. Earnings is what matter. But again, if you're running a business if you're public, you're forced to think about what are my GAAP, my generally accepted accounting principle earnings going to be, and is Wall Street going to get excited? So even with that focus on growth, the PEG ratio is still only 1. So I think the valuations are reasonable, but there was a big correction, in the last several months.
I've got this song in my head. I can, from The Who, I can see for miles and miles, right?
Yeah.
It's playing right now. I can see for miles and miles, right? What are some of these businesses like? What are some of the what are 2 or 3 or more companies that you like that have these kinds of fundamentals?
Yeah. Okay. First, let me make a point. Reliance Industries we do own, and but it is sort of its own unique animal. They touch all of India's economy in lots of different ways. It's the biggest company.
And they are the owner of
Geo Digital.
right.
And now they've already spun off the Geo Financial Services business. And it would appear that they will IPO at some point. Geo will IPO out of Reliance, at which point we will no longer own Reliance. So, but it's such an important part of the ecosystem that we decided we had to own Reliance to have that exposure. Though it's very likely that when we rebalance in June, it will be removed. Other than that, most, if not all, of these companies are entrepreneur founded, CEOs still running the company. And let me give you a couple examples. The one company that we own, that we've owned since the beginning of our main strategy 10.5 years ago, MakeMyTrip, MMYT, trades on the NASDAQ. It's an online travel company. You want a plane ticket, a hotel room, a train ticket, that's been the leader from the beginning. The founder went to IIT. The profile of all the founders today, they all went to the Harvard of India, IIT Delhi, or they went to the Stanford of India. We'll call it the IIM Ahmedabad, and that's the case with the MakeMyTrip founder. And that's one example. Now, one of the other reasons Indian companies are not well known is because none of them trade in the United States. So Alibaba, Mercado Libre, these companies are pretty well known and people can buy them, and Wall Street covers them because people can buy them. But because most of the Indian companies I'm going to mention now, no one's heard of, because they don't, no one's got any money in telling you about them, and they're not ringing the bell
Right.
in the U.S. So, Zomato is the one I think the most important to talk about. Zomato, again, the two founders went to IIT Delhi, and then they worked for Bain together, and then they got funded by Sequoia. Now, this is important because corporate governance is the biggest problem in emerging markets. And all of these companies, if Sequoia, which is investing for Harvard and Stanford's endowment, if they're setting these companies up and their lawyers are putting together the paperwork, that doesn't guarantee better corporate governance, but it's a pretty good head start versus the Adani group, for example.
Right.
So, and so what I'll tell people is it's the DoorDash of India. They deliver food, and it's true, 60% market share in food delivery, but that's where the comparison stops, because again, the greenfield nature of India is such that when DoorDash came to the United States, we had plenty of restaurants, and the restaurants had plenty of suppliers, right? So Zomato's fastest growing business the last few years was restaurant supplies, the B2B market. So they have a business called Hyperpure, which in and of itself can be a $10 billion plus business opportunity. And now they have a third business that's almost certainly going to be the biggest. It's called Blinkit. Blinkit. Blinkit is Zomato's quick commerce business. Now, quick commerce is eating India, and it might be the most exciting and disruptive e-commerce story on the planet today. So let me explain what quick commerce is. Quick commerce is basically 10-minute delivery of anything you want. Now, it could be 15 minutes, could be 30 minutes, depends on what you want exactly, but it's the hyper speed delivery of things that you want. And in India, you can now get thousands of items in 10 minutes. And Blinkit is the leading company in this, the leading brand. Actually, Zomato acquired them 3 years ago. So here's how this works. Rather than, first of all, there's an app. You're going to download the app, and you're going to put in your address, and it's going to tell you what items are available, and it'll feature certain things, but you can search for other things, and there's a good chance they haven't. And the way this works, first of all, you need low-cost labor, two-wheeled vehicles, dense cities, low-cost labor. And then what you do is, rather than have an Amazon warehouse every 5 or 10 miles, you're going to make a micro warehouse every half a mile. A dark store might be a couple thousand square feet. It might have 5,000 items in it. And when it's just a miniature warehouse. And when you push the button, that item is going to be off of the shelf into a bag in 1.5 minutes. And because it's only going less than a mile, a scooter's going to grab it and take it and come back and pick up the next item. And this is absolutely exploding in India. The growth rates are off the charts. The expectation is that in the next 5 years, it will grow 650% to about $40 billion of revenue.
Wow.
And now the reason this is such a big deal is because right now, 90% of the consumer spending is done at 13 million mom and pop stores. The Kirana stores that have about 150 or 200 items, and they're all over the place. I mean, literally, every block's got 1 or 3 or 5 of these stores. They might specialize in different things, but it's essentially a counter, and there's a couple hundred items behind the counter, and there's a person standing there, and you walk up and get what you want. Well, that's 90% of all of the spending today. And now, not only can you get those 150 items in 10 minutes without even leaving, there's another thousands of other items that store doesn't have. And because of all of the layers of distribution to get to that Kirana store. And because in Blinkit's case, they're going, the manufacturer actually owns the inventory that's in the dark store. So this is eating the Kirana stores alive. Now, but again, the Kirana store has only got 200 items, so someone else is losing share also.
Yeah.
So the traditional e-commerce leaders, likely Flipkart and Amazon, are pressured by this. But what makes this model super exciting, and this is when you see truly disruptive business models that go in directions nobody anticipated, is a good sign. So let me tell you some of the things that have evolved for this. Now, obviously, one of the advantages of this model is that you have all the data, so you know what items are selling, and you can customize your inventory. India is very diverse, and you can go 5 blocks away, and that you might want to change half the items because that neighborhood is a different religion,
Right,
or whatever it might be. So you can hyper customize the inventory. You can have seasonal offerings. So we were there during Diwali. First thing you see, boxes of chocolates and so forth.
yeah.
Um, um, they restock the stores at night, so they do have a big warehouse, but they don't bring the inventory to the small micro warehouse until the roads are cleared and everyone's asleep. But now they're going into amazing different directions. You can get an iPhone in 10 minutes. It's not just orange juice and
Anything you want, almost anything you want.
almost anything. And let me give you 2 examples. These have just popped up this calendar year. 10-minute private ambulance.
Wow.
So the traffic's bad in India. The public healthcare system, ambulance times aren't very robust. 10-minute blanket private ambulance service. Again, this isn't in every market, but
That's completely like that completely seems like outside of the purview of what you would think, a company like this would do, right? That's what you meant. Like completely unexpected offerings.
No. Here's another one. The number one brand of automobile in India historically is the Suzuki Maruti.
Right.
Apparently, when India wanted a car maker, nobody applied except for Mr. Suzuki. So that was a good move by Mr. Suzuki as he was starting off, and he's passed away in the last several months, but he's got the largest market share. If you want to test drive a Suzuki, just go to Blinkit. In 10 minutes, they'll be there to test drive.
Take you for the test drive. That's great.
So, and there's so many other directions they're going. All of them are now adding a Blinkit Bistro. You want a couple lattes? We'll cut out Starbucks altogether. We'll have our own. Printed documents. You need passport photos. You have a big meeting and you want to print your slides. 10-minute delivery. So anyway, this quick commerce thing is I think it's going to be a huge deal. As with a lot of things, you see the naysayers. I saw one report yesterday where somebody called it a professional investor called it a fad. That's always a good sign when people say it's a fad, because
it's that kind of skepticism.
This is changing consumer behavior in a major way, and it's it's very disruptive, and you're already seeing the protests and the Kirana stores. Trade federations are mounting attacks and so forth, but without somebody stopping this, these are going to be massive companies.
It works the way it works in India because it's very crowded. There's lots of traffic. People don't want to get in their car or on their bike to go and get something. And if someone else can do it for cheap, then why not?
You need low-cost labor, two-wheeled vehicles, and dense populations. Bogota, Colombia is actually ground zero for this business model. The Latin American version, which is the biggest unicorn, will probably go public this year. But this is where I first saw this business play out.
Yeah.
And so again, in the case of in Bogota, all the drivers come from Venezuela.
Oh,
so they're working for half of basically the local. So you get low cost labor, India's got plenty of low-cost labor. You need two-wheeled vehicles. You also need places to park them.
Right.
So our densest cities like New York, yeah, you got a lot of people, right? But okay, the dark store is going to cost. Where are you going to put that? Now in
Yeah.
India, there's plenty of places to put a dark store. And then when the driver gets there, he can't get ticket. If you tried to double park in New York City and bring your
Right.
delivery up, so India is perfect for quick commerce. And again, because it's already kind of what they're doing is walking down to the store to get a top up purchase, and now instead of going there, I can stay here and it might be the same price or cheaper, and I can get 10 different colors of the same thing that he has. And, so I don't know. I'm quite excited about that particular business as an example, but just a couple others. We own a company called FirstCry, which is online, marketplace to buy baby products. And India's got,
Okay.
20 million births a year. I mean, they're like a great, great demographic tailwind. Online travel. We own MakeMyTrip, which, serves the high end of the market. There's a recent IPO called Ixigo, and they've cornered the buses and the train market where the next billion will come from.
Right.
And, only 3% of Indians fly on airplanes today. So that's going to have huge growth. InfoEdge is a company that has two businesses. One, got the leading job site. So if you want a job, you're probably going to use their website, or if you want an apartment or a house. So there's lots of different parts of the economy, but the digital version of it is what we're trying to capture.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Do you have any parting thoughts?
Look, emerging markets are really the future of the world. I mean, this is, 85% of the world's people, 90% of the world's young people, and their economies are growing faster and they're getting bigger and growing faster every day. And so it's an important part of the investment landscape. Now, unfortunately, the traditional approach, the traditional indexes have failed people. And so people don't have a good experience. They haven't made any money in 10 years. And a lot of people have given up. But I think that, what you need to do is rethink how you're approaching emerging markets. And I've, devoted my career to this over the last 20 years. And I'm convinced that the answer is to invest in the internet companies. Now, if you look at where you made money in other markets, you'll see a pattern developing because the same has been the case in the United States. China's equities haven't done great, but the internet companies have done by far the best. And that, I think, is going to be the case in going forward in Brazil and in India and Southeast Asia. And those companies, most of them aren't even in the index. So you got to throw away the old model. And again, I'm biased that this is what my business does, but you want to buy the emerging markets, but you want to own the internet part of that. And within that universe, India stands alone, I think, is the biggest opportunity. And the one that is, not just the largest, but in many ways represents the earliest opportunity as well, because while its population is 1.5 billion, about half of those people are in the frontier market land in terms of, where they are in that income spectrum. So the duration of this growth, it can be significantly longer than other places.
Kevin, thank you so much for your incredibly valuable time and your energy and your insight. Where can people find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, which shouldn't be too hard if you put in my name and our ticker symbol. Or you can find us. Our website is emqqglobal.com.
Kevin, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you and get the lowdown on emerging markets and in particular get the lowdown on India.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me.